I've been shooting mostly handheld a lot over the past few years, and honestly, I've left my tripod, slider, and gimbal behind more than not. Once you get comfortable with your camera, you realize just how much you can do completely handheld. But handheld isn't for everyone. In fact, you may not be ready. Maybe you shouldn't film handheld at all, and here's why. I wouldn't recommend going handheld if you're a beginner just starting out. Sadly, your footage probably won't look very professional or good. It's best to master the basics first. Start with a tripod. This may sound silly, but I remember going to the park and practicing pans and tilts on a fluid video head tripod I had bought off of Craigslist. Next, I'd move on to a slider. You can still have it on top of a nice stable tripod, but now you can add so much more motion side to side and backwards and forwards. You can also practice your parallaxing skills. I remember taking my slider around town and to parks just to practice getting shots of random things. That way when I showed up to paid jobs, I already had experience and wasn't learning on the job how to make slider footage look good, and I didn't risk messing up any client footage. Once you've mastered the slider, it's time to move on to a gimbal. And which gimbal you use doesn't really matter, but I recommend a 3-axis single grip gimbal like the Ronin RS2 or Crane 2S. And getting good gimbal shots will take time, and your first shots will probably have a lot of ugly, blurry pans and up and down walking motion. But once you've learned to master the ninja walk, you can get some incredibly smooth footage. Once you have these different types of stabilization down, I think you'll be ready to use your bare hands. Some people may disagree and say that going handheld at the start is the right way, and they're not necessarily wrong. You can learn that way for sure, but if you want great looking footage sooner that your clients are willing to pay for, use stabilization you know you can rely on that will get you great results. Now, once you're ready to go fully handheld for video, you really should rig out your camera more than just a bare bones camera body. Can you do it stripped down? Of course, and I've seen guys do it that way and make some great looking footage. However, depending on your skill level, camera sensor, and lens, you may get terrible micro jitters and shaky footage. If you can, it's best to use a camera with in-body image stabilization. The Sony FX3 has 5-axis IBIS, and it does a pretty great job for me. You can also use a lens with optical stabilization to make it that much smoother. Of course, you can always use stabilization later on in post-production if still needed, but it has its limits. Not everything can be fixed in post. Now, besides those features, adding some extra weight to your camera will stabilize the shot so much more. It'll also make carrying it around all day that much more tiring. But at least you're not carrying a gimbal and tripod too, right? I think the added weight to your camera is a worthy trade-off. Some weight you can add easily is an external battery, like a V-mount battery or USB power bank. And adding a matte box to the front helps counterbalance the weight of the battery in the back. It's a good idea to try and make your handheld rig as balanced as possible so that your camera doesn't lean naturally in some weird direction. You can add 15mm rods and a follow focus, and a top handle is a must-have for me when filming handheld since I do a lot of work holding it from the top. A side handle or grip is another great addition, especially if you have a lot of cables that get in the way when gripping your camera body. It's still a good idea to add a quick release plate to the bottom of your handheld rig. That way you can quickly get back onto a tripod or slider when you need to on set. Besides the extra added weight, there are other well-known ways of making handheld footage look better. The most common one is filming in a high frame rate. Filming at 60, 120, or 240 frames per second is one of the easiest ways to smooth out your footage, as long as you play back your footage in your timeline at 24 or 30 frames per second so that it's slowed down to 40% speed or more. If you play back that footage in real time, it ends up dropping the extra unneeded frames and your footage ends up looking more jittery. So just keep that in mind. If you don't want something to be in slow motion later, film at a normal frame rate like 24 frames per second. There are so many benefits to filming handheld. You can work so quickly and move from shot to shot very fast. You don't lose any time moving a tripod and making sure it's level. You don't waste any time setting up a gimbal and rebalancing it every time you swap a lens or battery. You can get creative shots quicker, like low angle shots where you put the camera on the ground and tilt up. You can put the camera in strange places and tighter spots than you could with a big clunky slider. You can walk right up to your subject, get a close-up, then back away and get a wide shot, all within seconds. Handheld is perfect for run and gun work, documentaries and travel films. Every time I travel somewhere, I want to bring my camera, and of course, if you're like me, you bring your camera with you everywhere too. But all the extra gear like a tripod, slider, and gimbal often aren't even possible to fly with or bring along. So I've learned how to make great looking footage that works completely handheld. Filming handheld doesn't mean that you just have to hold the camera as still as possible. You can push in and pull out. You can follow your subject from behind or walk alongside them. You can of course pan and tilt. It's all up to you and what you want to do. There are some downsides to filming handheld. Typically, stock footage sites hate handheld footage. They may reject it and say it's too shaky. Not all stock sites, but many of them will. So if you plan on uploading and selling any footage from your shoot, I wouldn't recommend it. You can't go back. If you go handheld, that's the look, and there's only so much that warp stabilizer can do to fix a shot. So make sure again that your client or project fits the handheld look. There have been a few times that going handheld absolutely bit me in the butt because the client didn't like the look. Even though it wasn't shaky, in my opinion, it wasn't ultra smooth or steady. So the client saw it as an earthquake. It's best to run it by your clients first and give them some example footage of a video you've shot handheld so they can determine if they like the look and feel. I've had to reshoot an entire day before because I made the foolish assumption that the client would like the handheld look. Handheld can be distracting at times and bring attention to the camera work more than the subject matter and story. Remember Jason Bourne? Yeah, we're never gonna let that one down. However, handheld footage can inject so much energy and character into a shot. As long as it's done right and done tastefully, it can be done. Once you understand framing, creating an interesting shot, and have mastered the basic forms of stabilization, I think you'll be ready to go handheld. Now, hit subscribe right now, and I'll see you in the next video.